Welcome to the Vin Armani Show. It's 10 a.m. and we're broadcasting live from Las Vegas. We are streaming on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani. Also at Activist Post on Facebook, facebook.com/Activist Post. In addition, we are now streaming live via Periscope on Twitter. Christian, can you look over at that iPad and make sure? I just want to make sure that we are actually streaming on Twitter, that I actually put us live. I believe that I did. Broadcast has started. There we go. Okay. Fantastic. So now we are actually streaming live on Twitter. We've got a great show planned for you today. If you've been tuning in, we've got some updates on a lot of stories that we have been covering. We've got an update on the Dakota Access Pipeline. Brand new information just coming in today. We have an update on the whole fake news controversy, of course. Some interesting new news with Coinbase. And we have a wonderful guest, Christina Hildebrand, president of A Voice for Choice. We've got an edition of the show about the vaccine issue. That's something that I find very important. As someone who is an advocate of self-ownership, it's really important to me that I be able to choose what I can and cannot put in my body and what I must and must not put in my body. So we have a fantastic show ahead. Keep tuned in for the next 2 hours, and joining me for the next 2 hours, as always every Monday morning, is my co-host and producer, Mr. Christian Reyes.
Thank you, sir.
How are you doing?
It's great to be here.
Yeah, little hiccup. There's always some little tiny hiccup that we're dealing with, right? But that's because it's just the two of us.
Yeah, it makes it fun.
It's a labor of love, if you will. How was your week this week?
It was great. Did a lot of research, more internet marketing stuff, more communication stuff. Just keeps going.
Okay, cool. And you're gonna, you'll be over there suffering I think I'm a little warmer in this area of the studio. It's gotten cold here in Vegas. So, maybe that's a good segue, man. It's getting cold up in North Dakota. And our first story of the day is a breaking story. Just happened last night. Something that we had covered with Derek Bros, who I was actually hoping to have on the show this morning, but he's up there, and with the events happening, the Dakota Access Pipeline, DAPL, up at Standing Rock, it's been halted. Are we muted? Mute me. I'm not sure whether or not we are getting much audio on this. Basically, Dakota Access Pipeline, it's been halted. This was sort of a last-minute thing, so sorry if that audio is not coming through. But we do have a lot more information on this. If you want to, Christian, lower down the TR2 over there, just so that I can talk over it. Yeah, just lower that down. So yeah, this is a big win for the Sioux. It's a big win for the water protectors, and I wanna talk about this. So we'll let this rock. I don't know if we're getting adequate audio on this. The audio may be really low. Go ahead and lift that back up, and we'll just wait till this is finished out. All right, so Dakota Access Pipeline halted. From USA Today, this is coming from the Army Corps of Engineers. This is a quote from them. Although we have had continuing discussion and exchanges of new information with the Standing Rock Sioux and Dakota Access, it's clear that there is more work to do. Joe Ellen Darcy, the Army's Assistant Secretary for Civil Works, said in a statement Sunday afternoon, "The best way to complete that work responsibly and expeditiously is to explore alternate routes for the pipeline crossing." Darcy said the pipeline should undergo an environmental impact statement, a process that could drag on for months. The decision means construction will likely not be completed during Obama's remaining weeks in office. President-elect Donald Trump's administration, widely viewed as more friendly to energy interests, could reverse the Corps' decision after he takes office on January 20th. So this is, I guess, what the Standing Rock Sioux wanted. This is what the people who were out there protesting the pipeline wanted. What we basically have is, as we discussed in our DAPL edition, where we interviewed Derek Brose. If you want to go back and check that out, I believe that was episode 2. So you can go check that out, youtube.com/Vin Armani. What we discussed in that particular, in the final segment, was that this was a demand from the Sioux for the American government, particularly President Obama, to stop this. And he did. Most of the pipeline was private. Is private, I should say, but there was this one little section, I guess it's about 1,100 feet, that goes under the Lake Oahe, which is a reservoir for the dam that's there near Standing Rock. This, in studying this, in bringing this issue to the forefront, and in really wanting to look into the various issues around it myself, you know, I've come to some very interesting conclusions. And there's another story that is sort of brewing in the world of oil, because this is all related. So I'll start it out and then go into the other story. I'll start it out with a quote from Thomas Sowell. It's a quote that I like a lot. The famous economist, currently at, I believe it's the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. One of the smartest guys in the room for sure on economic issues. So if you don't know who he is, I'd suggest going and checking him out. But his quote is, "There are no solutions, only trade-offs," when we talk about economics. And so there's a broader context of the Dakota Access Pipeline. There's a broader context of what it is that the Dakota Access Pipeline is transmitting. You know, in the video, you're having oil referred to as this dirty fuel. You know, there are a lot of people who want to keep oil in the ground. That's what a lot of this protest is about. There's a lot of people who are anti-oil. And I want to delve into that just a little bit, like as our first thing. But one of the other stories from this week that's oil related, that's very important to all of us, is OPEC has cut output, and oil prices are rising because of it. OPEC is going to reduce output. OPEC is the cartel of oil-producing countries, is going to reduce output by about 1.2 million barrels a day by January. The cuts will come from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. Russia, which is not an OPEC member, also agreed to make cuts. And OPEC is looking to sustain a $50 to $60 price. And crude oil prices in that range would mean that U.S. shale oil producers can begin pumping again. So In 2015, oil took a nosedive in terms of the worldwide price. I believe we have that oil 2015, Christian. So if you see, this is from the beginning of 2015 to basically the end last year. You see the oil was up somewhere around about 55 and ended down below 40. Ended the year down below 40. Now, that's a huge, that's like a 20% drop. But what's really important about it, and the context that I want to talk about, is it's about U.S. oil. So basically, in the U.S., fracking now accounts for more than half of all U.S. oil output, according to the Energy Information Administration. It's a stunning feat considering fracking, which is how this shale oil is gotten, made up less than 2% of American oil production in the year 2000. And everyone expects the dormant shale oil fields to be easily switched back on the minute oil prices hit levels where they can make money. For some shale oil fields, that price can be as low as $40 a barrel. So you may remember this oil boom. If you go now, the chart, oil chart, Christian, there, this is what happened when OPEC made their announcement. You see oil prices down, way down in November, and then shooting back up now to about somewhere around in the $50 per barrel range. You can come back to me, Christian. So why this is important, it's a little complex, but let me try to break it down as simply as I can. When oil prices are, let's say, above about $45, $50 a barrel, these oil fields, particularly this Bakken oil field in North Dakota, which is huge, which this Dakota Access Pipeline, also often called the Bakken Pipeline, is all about. So this shale oil has changed the entire dynamics of oil in the world. And why it's important, why oil is important, is because there are basically, if you're talking about peace, if there's abundance, there's peace. Human beings, and especially civilizations, go to war over 4 essential things that you need. To have a peaceful society, there's got to be food, there's got to be water, there's got to be energy, and there's got to be metals. Metals to basically fabricate strong structures, to build machines. Also plastics, which are oil, which we'll get into, represent some section of that. And energy, most of the energy in the world that is this sort of mobile energy to transport things, for medicine, for plastics, for fertilizer. All around the world, petroleum is this huge chunk of that. So when you look around the world, and especially now as if you're an American and you look, say, to the Middle East, the reason why there is violence there is because we need oil. We need oil. We don't produce enough oil to supply all of our needs. And so we have to secure, as a civilization, we have to secure oil. We have to secure petroleum in order for civilization to function, which requires, or had required, going to foreign countries that had oil that could easily be brought up from the ground. Saudi Arabia, it costs about $1 a barrel to bring it out of the ground, and to set up an infrastructure there where we could get the oil coming in. So if you take a look at how we currently, this is in production there, Christian. So this is U.S. production of crude oil. This is an important little chart here, and I'm going to show you why. So we import about half of the oil that we need currently. Now, this has changed over time, but if you see right after 2000, you see that giant spike after 2000 in production? That's shale oil. That's fracking. Now, here's what's interesting when you talk about the imports. Go to the next and we look at the imports. You see how it's exactly opposite? Go back again, Christian, and back again. You can see that the more the U.S. is producing, the less it's importing. And it's importing it from all of the places that you perhaps don't want to be importing it from. Importing oil from Saudi Arabia puts money in the hands of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, I know that there were a lot of people protesting DAPL who were doing it for social reasons. They don't want to see government oppressing the native people. That's fantastic. I don't want to see government oppressing anybody. But it just so happens that the most oppressive governments in the world, like Saudi Arabia, happen to be exactly the governments that, when we import oil, we put money in their pockets. And to secure those fields so that we can import it, so that there isn't upheaval, so that the oil spigot doesn't get turned off because the government has been deposed, we sell them weapons, we support them with our military. Were there no Saudi oil being imported, there would have been no Osama bin Laden. Now, there might have been somebody else, but it wouldn't have been that. You worried about terrorism? Oil importing of the West. You're worried about war in the Middle East? Oil importing from the West. You're worried about civilians getting bombed in Aleppo? Oil importing from the West, period. So here's the thing about shale oil. We just recently, in the last few years, discovered how to get this oil out. And a lot of it is through fracking. If you want to show those numbers, we've got some fracking numbers. This is in the last 15 years. The number of wells, horizontal drilling and fracking, right? It's a new technology. And you see the fracking oil output. This is US. You see how it went up. Now, the United States is estimated. This is interesting. Go ahead and let's show this oil supply stat. When we're talking about oil, the United States is estimated to have 3.7 trillion barrels of shale oil resources. Now, mind you, the technology was not there 15 years ago for us to even get at this. At the current annual demand of 6 billion barrels, that's per year, 17 million barrels per day, the reserves in the US's own oil, at the current rate, now demand for oil is going down, so we should expect that the current rate it's not really going to get much higher than that. At the current rate, the US could supply its own oil for the next 600 years. And if it was just the US, those reserves could supply the entire world for the next 100 years. I want you to think about that. Just look at that and think about that when you think about war in the Middle East. When you think about children dying in Aleppo. When you think about girls being kidnapped in Nigeria, in the Niger Delta, because of the guerrillas that have come up there around the oil. Think about that when you talk about peace in the world, when you talk about security. This is what is being prevented by not having pipelines. By not having that pipeline, you are ensuring that the pain is pressed off to someone else because the oil has to come from somewhere. Now, I'm all for keeping a sustainable environment that's not destroyed, of course. I'm also all for trying to get oil demand down, and that's happening on its own. But at the current rate that it's at, oil just being transported by train, mostly, they are not able to produce enough oil to supply all of US demand. So there's the trade-off. It's much more complicated. And it's going to be one or the other. Christian, here's the other interesting thing to me about this situation. It's not just about the oil, because North Dakota added 35,000 North Dakota added 35,000 new jobs in 2011, and it's going to add another 10,000 this year. The trend's not going to peak until 2020. They're going to create 65,000 jobs on this oil field. Experts claim that they'd need to hire 10 people a day between now and 2020. And there are currently over 20,000 jobs available in North Dakota at this minute because of this technology, because of this shale oil.
Wow. And this is relatively new technology, yeah?
It's super new.
Right.
And it's not just that the technology is new, it's that getting the price down. And the more that this is going, the price that it takes to pull it out of the ground with this technology is going to get lower and lower and lower, right? The more you use technology, the more demand there is for drills, the more competition comes in the marketplace. So you may or may not like oil, right? You may be a let's keep it in the ground person.
Right.
But Saudi Arabia is not going to keep it in the ground. If you really want to keep it in the ground, the best thing that you possibly could do, if you're somebody in the US or Canada, if you want to keep it in the ground, move all of your oil over to your own production,
right,
and then start reducing your demand.
Yep, makes sense.
Then you don't have the Saudis involved in American politics. You don't have the war over there. You don't have a need to supply them fighters to bomb Yemen. You just don't have a need to do all of these things.
Solves a lot of problems.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, independence, resource independence, we know that that's the key to freedom.
Yep.
The more local you can get it, right?
Yep.
Which is amazing to me that I guarantee you I could walk through that protest site at DAPL, at Standing Rock, and there are people there who will advocate local food, who go to farmers markets. Buy local. We shouldn't be transporting it from all over the place. It's a waste. You know, it's factory farming. We can't do it on a local level. Those are the same people protesting having their oil be local. That they needed to put in their car, that's in their medicines, that's in the fertilizer, in plants, that's in the nylon strings that are tying together everything. I mean, it's a miracle resource. And the thing is, if you're watching this right now, you're admitting it's a miracle resource because there's oil in the microphones and my microphone stands and the camera and the computers, because all of everything plastic, look around you. We couldn't do this show without oil. If you took all of the plastic things and all of the oil out of your world, you'd basically, at this point in this civilization, you'd be like sitting butt naked on the floor. Essentially. So there are always trade-offs. I think that it's a very emotional situation. This probably, unfortunately, this was kind of a not so cool and not very ethical move on the part of President Obama. He's basically kicking the can down the road because they had already approved this. And the government needs this, and the U.S. government knows they need it, and there's plenty of lobbying from the U.S. oil industry, and especially when you're talking about that many jobs.
Right.
You know, as an American president, to say, we're not going to leverage our own resources. You know, it's like, for all the trillions of dollars that we are going to spend on our military because we're importing oil, you don't think that we could trade some of those trillions of dollars to make sure that the pipeline doesn't leak?
It would change everything in the States. It would be crazy. It's a ripple effect. It's a huge ripple effect.
And we have the largest, we are the Saudi Arabia of shale oil. We have the largest shale oil reserves of any country in the world, but we just couldn't get at them. We knew we had them, but we could not get at them. It's a whole new industry. I mean, how does that change the amount of money that stays in the country?
It changes everything. It would completely change the state of the country, for sure, within the next 3 to 5 years.
So, yeah. Yeah.
Pretty big.
And, it would definitely give us some leverage over good old Russia, who it appears, since we've been called Russian propaganda, I don't know why I would be pushing for U.S. oil, but that's our second story. Let's go to news number 2 here. Oh, the fakery continues. CNN with the hit piece. The hit piece on fake news. So they basically went and they rehashed fake news meets Russian propaganda. If you want to go ahead and throw up that story, Christian. This is the CNN story. Oh boy. Starts out, the 2016 presidential race was rife with disinformation, none more blatant than fake news, hoaxes, half-truths, outright lies that flash through the internet at warp speed. Take, for example, Pizzagate, a made-up story of a pedophilia ring supposedly being run out of a Washington, D.C. pizza parlor by none other than Hillary Clinton and her campaign chairman, John Podesta. Fueled by conspiracy theories, posting on social media sites like Reddit, Facebook, and Twitter, the story picked up so much traction that the New York Times and the Washington Post were forced to track it down, finally debunking it. Then there were stories about Clinton's health, not just her actual September bout with pneumonia, but other stories claiming she had a brain injury and was losing her mind. And then it goes straight to Western media, for the most part, are blaming Moscow. That is really? A jump. Pizzagate. Did you know that Pizzagate was being blamed on Moscow?
I didn't know it was debunked either.
I think we covered that in the last show. If you'd like to go and check out our show from last week, we covered the New York Times article not debunking anything. So basically what they did was they in this CNN story, tied it straight to this Russian propaganda. Then they jumped straight to 3. So they did the prop or not, which we covered, right? They did this other one, Clint Watts. This is, if you want to check that Clint Watts story there, this is from War on the Rocks from back in November 6th. Called Trolling for Trump, How Russia is Trying to Destroy Our Democracy. From this article, during the Cold War, gray measures used semi-covert communist parties, friendship societies, and non-governmental organizations to engage in party-to-party and people-to-people campaigns. Today, gray measures on social media include conspiracy websites, data dump websites, and seemingly credible news aggregators that amplify disinformation and misinformation. Conspiracy sites include outlets such as InfoWars and Zero Hedge, along with a host of lesser-known sites that repeat and repackage the same basic content for both right and left-wing consumers. So this is very similar to the Prop or Not story. They describe this whole web of intrigue. It's this active measures, Christian. This is the, let's see if we've got, hold on one sec. So this is our active measures, Russia's active measures blending overt to the covert on social media. So basically what they're saying is that you have this overt Russian propaganda. So this is Russian television, RT, Sputnik News. They manipulate the true information and they push misinformation. Then they're saying you have these conspiratorial websites. So they're listing InfoWars, Zero Hedge, others. So obviously we've been thrown into that list that activists post as well. And it says that these copy the themes, they shape the themes into narratives and arm hecklers with content, which then goes to hecklers, who I guess that's what they're calling everybody who shares our content, is a heckler. And they discredit democracy. They sow mistrust. They advance the narratives. So this is there because nothing on RT is true. But the other thing about it is sometimes RT is pulling things from the other direction. Mm. And I wonder if RT is propaganda of the Russian government, then how are CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, etc., who WikiLeaks has shown were having direct interactions and being directed by the U.S. government and by factions within certain political parties, aren't they just U.S. propaganda? And is U.S. government propaganda better for the people than the propaganda of any other guy? How about we just don't do propaganda?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Or we don't do government
exactly
propaganda, right? Like, how about we just do propaganda that's like that's for peace and for liberty?
Yeah.
So that was the second study that they did. Then they talk about, then this was new. I hadn't seen this. This is the Rand Corporation did a study called the Russian Fire Hose of Falsehood Propaganda Model, why it might work, and options to counter it. So basically within this, their recommendations are: forewarn audiences of misinformation or merely reach them first with the truth rather than retracting or refuting false facts. So basically, before I go on, and these recommendations are down here at the bottom, I guess that this is for the U.S. government. So they're telling the U.S. government how to counter Russian propaganda, which sounds to me like the beginning of what they consider to be like a media war. Prioritize efforts to counter the effects of Russian propaganda and focus on guiding the propaganda's target audience in more productive directions. I'm assuming that's the American public, and the more productive directions, I guess, is whatever the U.S. government wants us to do. Compete with Russian propaganda. Both the United States and NATO have the potential to prevent Russia from dominating the information environment. Increase the flow of information that diminishes the effectiveness of propaganda and, in the context of active hostilities, attack the means of dissemination. So this is, the active hostilities part is a little concerning, because I don't know if they're saying that, if they're insinuating that there might be upcoming active hostilities with Russia, but that sounds very not good. This is a propaganda battle. Clearly, a propaganda battle. Like. Yeah. And the unfortunate and scary thing is, it's one thing for it to be just media stories, and we covered those. It's another thing for Rand Corporation to start getting involved, because they tend to manipulate the opinion of the government. When people like Rand or Heritage Foundation, these think tanks, get in there, laws tend to change. And that's when it gets scary, and when it's potentially scary for anybody who's listed on that list, when it gets to the level of McCarthy. And it hadn't happened. So you go from fake news to Russian propaganda to the Rand Corporation to a House bill recently passing. From Activist Post, House bill targeting Russian propaganda passes in the House. This is the House passing a bill to spend $170 million to combat, quote, Russian propaganda. H.R. 6393, Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2017, passed in the House of Representatives on November 30th. The legislation deals with a number of intelligence-related issues, including Russian propaganda, or what the government calls propaganda. Section 501 calls for the government to counter measures by Russia to exert covert influence carried out in coordination with or at the behest of political leaders or the security services of the Russian Federation, and the role of the Russian Federation has been hidden or not acknowledged publicly. Definitions include media manipulation, covert broadcasting, disinformation and forgeries, and funding agents of influence. So, Christian, I want to talk about this real quick. This is bad. This is very bad. It's potentially bad for us, because who is going to determine what constitutes something being carried out in coordination with or at the behest of political leaders or the security services of the Russian Federation? How would you even determine that without some really severe investigation?
Yep.
So are we talking about a campaign of surveillance,
That's exactly what it sounds like.
Trying to gain, I mean, are we about to be surveilled? Mm-hmm. Are we about to have our personal lives, we and the people at InfoWars and the people at Zero Hedge, you know, the people at all, your name ends up on one of these lists, and all of a sudden that now the government feels like they have probable cause to dig through every piece of your life trying to find some evidence of Russian influence? And what if they find something else? Mm-hmm. Like, how do we preserve the freedom of the press? Have we reached the point where everyone in the press is going to be anyone who retweets or reblogs a story that may have happened to have originated at RT, or that is critical of the U.S. government? I mean, isn't part of the American tradition that we're allowed, and not only allowed, but expected?
And we're supposed to question.
We're supposed to be critical of our own government. If we weren't critical of our own government, there would be no reason for instance, term limits. Mm-hmm. Why can the president only serve for 8 years? Well, because we're critical of what he does. Mm-hmm. If we don't like what he's doing, so this is really giving some very, very broad powers. And I think that people on both sides of this issue need to be very careful. Mm-hmm. The people who have been in the tank for Trump need to be well aware that he's the one who's going to have this power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We already see, I mean, he just tweeted the other day about he was watching Saturday Night Live and he called it unwatchable, you know? Now this dude is commenting on what certain people in the media do. You know, like, are we going to reach that, like, J. Edgar Hoover, COINTELPRO? Like, is that what we're looking at right now?
It sure does look like that. And it's definitely scary. It's really, I'm curious to see where it will lead to, but I'm also like, I think the main, I think that social media outlets are the main targets for, for controlling for the government to control what's going through the feed. So it cuts a lot of people.
I mean, that's the private level, right? Mm-hmm. And it's one thing to cut a feed, but it's another thing when these guys are passing. I mean, this is in the Intelligence Authorization Act. That's what I want to make really clear, right? Mm-hmm. So this is funding for the CIA, NSA, I guess DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. This is funding for intelligence agencies. I believe there are in the U.S. I believe there are something like almost 100 different intelligence agencies. Some of them we've never heard of, right? Some are smaller and more regional or more localized around certain things. I mean, the Secret Service has an intelligence side that goes after like money laundering and things like that. The FBI's got a counterintelligence wing. They always have, This is funding to start going after quote unquote misinformation or disinformation, which I'm assuming, and it says, this is it, where it says, this is specifically where the role of the Russian Federation has been hidden or not acknowledged publicly. So this isn't about RT. This isn't about Sputnik. This is about trying to root out Russian collaborators who are secretly collaborating with Russia. Like, are we back in fucking 1965? Like, what are we doing? What is this about? What is this about? I mean, and it's going to be anyone who's critical, potentially anybody who's critical of the U.S. government. So this is something that we need to follow. It needs to be out in the open. People need to talk about it. Mm-hmm.
Needs to be watched closely.
Watch it. Share this information. If you value, as a viewer, if you value getting independent information that has not been vetted by the government or that has a different spin or is investigated differently and is critical of the government, you need to be all about right now speaking out in every way that you can to prevent this thing from happening.
And also connecting communication. So sign up for the email list, do everything that you can to stay.
Follow the individuals that, follow Activist Post. Follow me at Vin Armani on Twitter. Follow Christian at Christian_Rays, and share. And share the information about these types of stories. These are very, very important stories. Our freedoms are being eroded in ways that are super dangerous and super unprecedented in the history of the United States. On that note, we covered this Coinbase story, I believe it was last week, that the IRS, this is our third story of the day, that the IRS had, and Christian, also, if you want to try to get Christina up, we can maybe go to her a little bit. Our guest for today. So Coinbase, a Bitcoin third-party provider, had a request come in from the IRS saying that the IRS wanted all of their client information from the last 2 years. Now, it's gone further. So Coinbase was ordered to turn over their customer records to the IRS. A federal judge granted a request for what is called a John Doe summons, demanding 3 years of customer records from the Bitcoin exchange Coinbase. Now, a John Doe summons, it's just a cute term for a general warrant to rummage through everybody's files to see who may have skirted taxes. This is a crazy story. This is, again, Fourth Amendment. This is not supposed to be able to happen. But basically what happened is the request was triggered after the IRS found instances of tax evasion involving Coinbase customers. In his declaration to the court in support of the summons, the senior revenue agent, David Utski, noted that his investigations included 2 taxpayers with annual revenues in the millions who admitted disguising the amount they spent purchasing the Bitcoins as deductions for technology expenses on their tax returns. Those corporate taxpayers had wallet accounts at Coinbase. So, Christian, let's talk about this a little bit. Why don't you lower her? I think I'm hearing her in my headphones. Lower that all the way down, and make sure that her audio, the Skype audio, is not lit up. It's not lit up, right? Okay, so good. So let's have a little conversation about this, and then we'll go to our break and go to our guest Christina Hildebrand from A Voice for Choice. We're going to talk about vaccines, but before we do, this is important. It's interesting what happened. I want to give the simple breakdown of this. So Coinbase is a company that we recommend, and Activist Post, I believe it's activistpost.com/Bitcoin is the Bitcoin beginner's guide to Bitcoin, which is really great. And we actually in that recommend Coinbase as somebody that we trust. I have a Coinbase wallet myself that I use on occasion. They're an exchange. You can go online, you can buy Bitcoin with your credit card or with PayPal, and it deposits to your wallet. Very, very nice wallet, very nice setup, great company. So a lot of people have used Coinbase. Now, what happened was there were 2 separate companies, large companies, corporations with millions of dollars in revenue every year. The IRS was auditing them, and in that audit, they saw that, or these companies admitted that they had purchased Bitcoin on Coinbase, but they had deducted it as a technology purchase expense. So you can deduct when as a business you buy technology. We buy a new computer, we buy these cameras, we buy whatever, we upgrade our technology. You can take that as a deduction on your taxes. Yeah. So they had just bought virtual currency. They'd bought Bitcoin, and they deducted that. So the IRS, in seeing that these 2 companies had done this, filed a motion with the court to say, well, now we have reason to believe that because these two people did it and they have Coinbase wallets and Coinbase accounts, that probably other people have done it as well, tried to skirt their taxes. So now we need to see all of Coinbase's records from the past, 2 years? Which is, there's a great quote actually about this. Jim Harper at the Cato Institute, he said, equally shocking is the weak foundation for making this demand. In a declaration submitted to the court, an IRS agent recounts having learned of tax evasion on the part of one Bitcoin user and two companies. On this basis, he and the IRS claim a reasonable basis for believing that all U.S. Coinbase users may fail or may have failed to comply with the Internal Revenue laws. If that evidence is enough to create a reasonable basis to believe that all Bitcoin users evade taxes, the IRS is entitled to access the records of everyone who uses paper money. Anecdotes and online braggadocio about tax avoidance are not a reasonable basis to believe that all Coinbase users are tax cheats whose financial lives should be open to IRS investigators and the hackers looking over their shoulders. There must be some specific information about particular users, or else the IRS is seeking a general warrant, which the Fourth Amendment denies it the power to do. Interesting in this is the actual filing itself. I believe we have, Christian, if you want to throw that filing. This I found very, very telling. So this does basically lays out what we talked about why they wanted, this is from the IRS. This is the important part. Number 7. The information sought to be obtained from the examination of the records and the identity of the persons with respect to whose tax liabilities the summons will issue is not readily available from other sources. So what does that mean, Christian? Basically, that is the IRS saying, if we do not get this information from Coinbase, we have no other way of getting this information. If we are not allowed to look through the records of these third parties to basically match up the transactions that happened, we actually can't tell if anybody's hiding their money on the blockchain. So this is a pretty powerful and interesting admission by the IRS, especially when you consider, if viewers want to go back and watch our interview with the guys at Stash Crypto, talking about the Stash Node Pro and being able to run your own Bitcoin node where you don't need a third party.
Next level.
Where you don't need a third party. So even the IRS themselves are admitting that if you don't tell us how much money you've got on the blockchain, just Bitcoin, not Zcash, not these crazy other cryptocurrencies that are so private, just Bitcoin. If you don't tell us what money you've put on the Bitcoin blockchain, and we can't see the records of you making that transaction, we have no clue.
Power. Yep.
No clue. So for the agorists out there, for the anarchists out there, it's an interesting, interesting little situation. So some great and interesting news. I think some things to chew on, but we have a great interview today, and I guess we can probably bring her on a little bit early because I'd like to take some time with this one. This is an important one to me as a proponent of self-ownership, of wanting to have control over my own body. What I don't like the idea of the government telling me what I can and cannot, must not put into my body. So this is big. We're going to talk about vaccines. We may get into some other issues around the same vein, but we are going to go to break, and then we are going to come back with Christina Hildebrand, president of A Voice for Choice. Welcome back to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani, also on Facebook with our content partner, Activist Post. So you can reach them at facebook.com/Activist Post. And in addition to that, we are streaming on Twitter, on my Twitter, at Vin Armani. Today we have a very special guest that we're welcoming to the show. I would like to welcome Christina Hildebrand, founder and president of A Voice for Choice Incorporated. Christina, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, great. And we are getting her loud and clear. So A Voice for Choice Incorporated, a tax-deductible nonprofit 501c3 organization, was founded by Christina Hildebrand. Christina is passionate about ensuring people know what they are putting into their bodies, be it food, air, water, or medications. For the past 12 years, Christina has spent many thousands of hours researching and sharing her knowledge within her local community. However, with the growth of Big Ag and Big Pharma's influences on U.S. politics, Christina realized that she needed to take this to a different level and educate the masses on their right to informed choice and transparency of what goes into their bodies. Christina Hildebrand, welcome to the Vin Armani Show.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk today about vaccines. I'm glad that you're on. You have informed me quite a bit in the time that I've known you about vaccines. I already, as people know, I am a big proponent of self-ownership. I already am very much against the idea of government being able to say that they can insert things into my body. That's huge for me. Not everybody has that as a principle. So when it comes to vaccines, it's a much larger issue. I think that especially with parents, which is, it seems where this whole vaccine thing is really playing out, that it seems to be an issue between kind of this greater good of health and individual choice. I'd want to inform some people on all of those things. So if you will, I'd like to just walk through this thing. I know that there is a lot of information, so I'd like to walk slowly through that if we could do it.
Sure.
Okay. First thing. I think, like, when we talk about vaccines, we often assume that people actually know that everybody that we're talking to is actually well aware of what the sort of technology or concept behind vaccination, inoculation, whatever it is. So as we talk about vaccines, can you explain to people what it is that a vaccine does, or what a vaccine is supposed to do?
Right. And supposed to do is a big word for it. Vaccines are supposed to, you're supposed to get a little bit of the virus. It is supposed to be with an adjuvant, which I'll get into in a little bit. It's supposed to stimulate your immune system to have a response to that disease, and in doing that makes you immune to the disease. There are several issues with that because no vaccine is 100% safe and effective. So no vaccine is 100% effective. There are varying levels of efficacy in a vaccine. So you can get a vaccine and actually not have any reaction to it and not be immune to the disease. If you get most of these diseases, especially the childhood diseases such as measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, pertussis, which is whooping cough, if you get them as a child, you won't get them again in your lifetime. And so from the real disease, you get full immunity. In other words, you won't get them again in the lifetime. From the vaccine, there are some people who initially don't react to the vaccine, and so immediately don't have any immuno antibodies towards the disease, and so if they're exposed to the disease, we'll get the disease. And then there's also the issue of waning vaccines, which means that over time these vaccines are no longer effective.
Okay, so the basics is, and what the vaccine is kind of standing in for. The idea is, Christian, if you could jump back to me as well here. So the idea is you get a disease. So let's say we're talking about measles, mumps, I guess chicken pox. Most people know
Yeah.
this with chicken pox, right? That's it. You get chicken pox. You get it one time when you're a kid, and after you have chicken pox, you can't get chicken pox again, right? And so the vaccine is kind of it's standing in for that disease. So when you give the vaccine, so people understand this as we carry on. When you give the vaccine, if you give a measles vaccine, you're giving, essentially on a grand term. I mean, there's some nuances here, but you have to give somebody measles in order for them to be immune to measles, right? So the measles vaccine is giving measles.
Right, but it's a very, very small amount of measles. Okay. There's also a difference between live vaccines and not live vaccines. Okay. Live vaccines actually have a live virus, and the measles, mumps, rubella has a live virus in it.
Okay.
The other piece of it is that because you're giving such a small piece of the virus, you need something else to stimulate your immune system. And that's, for me, when I first started researching vaccines, which was about 12 years ago before my first daughter was born, it was, if you asked me what's a vaccine, I would have said, oh, it's a virus and maybe, I don't know, some saline solution or something.
Right, that's what I
benign.
think. Yeah, okay.
So
what is a vaccine? What's in a vaccine?
What's in a vaccine? A whole lot of crap is in a vaccine.
Okay.
So there's the virus, but then you also need an adjuvant, and mostly these days the adjuvant is aluminum. Or aluminium, as we say it in England. So it's mostly aluminum, and what that does is it stimulates the immune system. It makes your autoimmune system have a much, much stronger reaction to the virus. And when your body is stimulated like that, the virus, even though it's a tiny piece of the virus, your body actually reacts to that virus and creates an autoimmune response to it.
Okay, wait. I want to just back up quickly. I'm sorry. I may interrupt you at times here because even now this is actually the first time I'm really understanding this. Okay, so this adjuvant, like that aluminum or whatever, is stimulating the immune system, but
correct.
What I'm understanding then is that that whatever that adjuvant is then must be something that the body naturally is viewing as a poison or a toxin.
Correct.
Because our immune system goes into action over toxins or over poisons. So you have the virus, but there's an additional poison that has to be put in order for it to work in the way that it's supposed to work. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, basically, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And if you just gave yourself the virus, just the small amount of the virus, if you just injected that into your bloodstream, and you have to realize you're injecting this into the bloodstream. That's another major piece of this. But if you just injected the virus, that small amount of virus into your bloodstream, you wouldn't have most people would not have a reaction to it.
Now let me ask you this. If you just injected the adjuvant, so let's say you took everything out except for the adjuvant with that aluminum, would your body go into an immune response to the toxin?
Yes. And that's actually, so I'm probably skipping way ahead of where you want to be right now.
But
that's actually something that when they do research on these and clinical trials on these vaccines, they actually test the vaccine virus plus adjuvant plus all the other stuff in the vaccine versus the adjuvant plus all the other stuff in the vaccine. So basically the vaccine minus the virus. And so when you look at the adverse reactions to those things, there is no major difference, or they claim that there's no major difference because your body's reacting to, most people who have an adverse reaction to the vaccine are not having an adverse reaction to the virus, they're having an adverse reaction to the other ingredients that are in a vaccine.
Okay, this is good. I'm now getting a more clear picture of this. So there is an argument then. So now let's talk about, you talked a little bit about the waning vaccines, and you talked a little bit about the effectiveness rate of these vaccines. Right. Another question that is always raised for me, so this sort of big vaccine hoopla happened when it really popped huge, was that the Disneyland measles thing, right? That was a few years ago. And it was that people were getting measles after they went to Disneyland, and then people were saying, well, I don't want my, the big argument is I don't want my vaccinated child to be at school with an unvaccinated child. Now, for me, I guess I'm missing how vaccines work, because isn't it that if I'm vaccinated, isn't the whole idea of a vaccine that if I'm vaccinated for measles, that I can't catch measles? Isn't that the idea of how a vaccine is supposed to work?
Yes, that's how a vaccine is supposed to work.
Okay, so then if the vaccines are working in the way that they're supposed to be working, and I have a child and I send my vaccinated child to school, if the vaccine's working as it says on the label,
yes,
how can my child why would an unvaccinated child make a difference? Because they can't give my child measles. Isn't that how it's supposed to work?
So that's how it's supposed to work, and there's two parts of that argument.
Okay.
So the first part of it is there are immunocompromised children, which are they're very minimal. So let's go back to the Disney outbreak, which I live in California, and so California passed SB 277, which is a law that mandates vaccines. It took away our personal belief exemption, so you could no longer have a personal belief or religious exemption to vaccines going into school for your children going into school. That was prompted by the measles outbreak in Disneyland, in which 136 people got the measles in California. Now, we have 40 million people in California. We also have 1 million tourists every year. So 146 people out of 40 million people is a tiny, tiny number. The other piece of it is that of those 146 people, only 24 of them were school-aged children. So again, the number becomes even smaller, and none of those children had got or contracted measles in school. So the law in California sort of was asking to mandate in school, and to your point, we've got these people that if they're vaccinated, if they're fully vaccinated, you would think that it would be effective, and there would be no worry. The person that brought the law up, or was one of the sort of key poster children for it, was an immunocompromised child who had cancer and was not able to get the second dose of MMR when he entered kindergarten. And so there was a concern that he would get the measles because he wasn't fully vaccinated. The other piece of that is that you would think that they're effective. They're not 100% effective. So there are varying levels of efficacy on a vaccine. We see some of them have an efficacy over a few years. The chickenpox vaccine, for example, if you only get one dose, there's a higher percentage of people not actually having immunity after a year. The pertussis, which is whooping cough, there are outbreaks of whooping cough all over the U.S. 90 to 95% of the people who get whooping cough in those outbreaks are fully vaccinated, have had the full 4 or 5 doses of the DTaP vaccine.
Wait, how many? What was the percentage of people that you said who get whooping cough who've been vaccinated?
Right now, 95% have been fully vaccinated.
90. Okay, I think let's linger on that one for a second. So, 95% of the people who get whooping cough are fully vaccinated, but
yes.
Are there? I guess I wonder. Or is it being prevented though? Like, so we're having an outbreak. Do they know, like, okay, yes, let's say, so everybody's vaccinated, pretty much, right?
Right.
So what, like,
the size of the outbreaks is
well, I mean, I guess is there any way to know if in that vaccinated population, how many people is the vaccine working for? You know what I mean? We know that it's not working for some people because 95% of the people catching it.
Right.
But is there this some huge number of people who are just fine and immune because of the
so
it's
hard to answer that question because you don't know how many people have been exposed to whooping cough.
Right. You can't
What you can look at is that the number of people that are getting whooping cough now is less than before the vaccination. But that doesn't mean to say the vaccination caused that.
And I think we have something you sent over to kind of
a
little save lives thing there. Nope, save lives should be
the one that has
save
the
lives.
like.
Is that it? That's not it.
No, the one that has the chart.
There, that one.
That one.
Yes.
So this, you can't see it very well on the screen, but basically what this shows is this is actually the mortality. It's not the number of cases, but what it shows is from 1900s onwards. It shows measles, scarlet fever, typhoid, whooping cough, and diphtheria. And it shows that all of these things, the mortality rates for all of those diseases was declining much before the vaccines were introduced. So each of the arrows is where the vaccines was introduced. The last one, the measles vaccine, was introduced when basically there was very little mortality. Even the whooping cough one was very little mortality. What you'll see if you look at the number of cases, cases even during this time continued to be quite high. But they started to reduce as well. Now, if you look at the reason why these numbers went down and mortality went down was because we have good health, we have nutrition, which is nutrition, we have clean water, we have good sanitation, we have Western medicine, we have, basically we've become more hygienic, and therefore many of these diseases were being spread and were killing people because of the lack of clean water, clean sanitation, hygiene. In the hospitals and outside the hospitals. The number of cases, I mean, if you look at scarlet fever and typhoid, they were eliminated without any vaccine at all. So these numbers went down and the number of cases went down without the vaccine.
So back up just real quick. So scarlet fever, there's no vaccine. Typhoid, there's no vaccine. And it looks like they declined in sort of line with all of the other, there's a trend of every single one of them.
Yep. And if you look at both of them over the time after the vaccines, if you look at the number of cases, the number of cases of those two also declined. So we no longer have scarlet fever, we no longer have typhoid in this country. So if you look at that, so your question of, are there cases of people who are vaccinated who wouldn't have gotten have the number of cases of the disease actually declined, and would they have declined without the vaccine anyway? The hypothesis is, based on scarlet fever and typhoid, is yes. And the reason behind that is that there is better nutrition, there is better sanitation, there is better hygiene, but there's also the fact of what's called herd immunity, and herd immunity.
Yeah, talk about that, because that's something that that's a term I always hear brought up, and I do not understand it at all. So if you could explain what that is.
Herd immunity was given to vaccine immunity. They actually, in California, they've now changed the word to community immunity because they didn't like the word herd. Right. So we now have community immunity, same thing as herd immunity. In the real disease, when a disease such as, let's say, measles, pertussis, scarlet fever, you can catch that from somebody, but because you get lifetime immunity from it, you'll never catch it again. So at some point, the number of people catching it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until it becomes eradicated. That's the theory behind it.
Okay.
Now, the theory that the vaccine manufacturers and the proponents of vaccines have is that that herd immunity translates to vaccines. The issue there is that you have those two times when you don't have full efficacy, that it just doesn't work. So you either have, there's a small percentage, somewhere between 3 and 5% for each vaccine, that those people just never become immune to the disease based on the vaccine. Then you also have the waning immunity. So you have, after a year, 2 years, 10 years, some period of time, the vaccine wanes in some people, all people, we don't really know. And therefore, those people, even though they've had the vaccine, can get the disease thereafter. As I said, we've seen it with pertussis. We saw it with mumps. At Harvard last year, a group, they had to cancel graduation because a group of people got mumps. All of them, 100%, were fully vaccinated. There's also, the measles outbreak in 2014-15, here about 50% of those people were vaccinated. So you're seeing the vaccines not working anymore. And the question is, nobody knows how long the vaccines wane. The other critical piece of that I should point out is that measles, mumps, rubella, whooping cough, chickenpox, those are considered what's called childhood diseases. And they were called childhood diseases for a reason. You got them when you were a child. You got them when you were a child because they gave you lifelong immunity, and they also are much more, you have greater side effects when you're older with them. So, for example, mumps, if you get mumps as an adult, there's a chance, if you're a male, there's a chance of you becoming sterile. If you get rubella as a female and you're pregnant, there could be implications to your fetus. There are. If you get chickenpox when you're adult, most adults get much worse cases of chickenpox.
Oh yeah,
than when they're a child.
I've heard that a lot, where people are like, you've never had chickenpox? Like I remember ever since I was a kid, where like adults they'd say, "Oh my God, you're an adult and you've never had chickenpox. You have to like stay away. There's no way if you get this chickenpox, you're gonna die, man."
Right.
But I remember I got chickenpox.
You won't die, but
I got chickenpox though, and it was. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember being kind of miserable and stuff for like a couple weeks or something, but. I got over it.
That's the piece of it, is that there are most of these childhood diseases. Are there children that died? Are there children that, if they had them today, would die? Yes, but it's not because of the disease necessarily. It's because they're already immunocompromised, and those are the same children that are, that have other issues that the vaccine is also going to create reactions in them, because the vaccine with every vaccine there's a risk that comes.
Okay, so let's talk about this sort of growth of let's look at this vaccine schedule, because we were talking about the things that the other one, dude. Nope. Vaccine schedule. Nope, the other one. Nope. Is there another one?
Yeah, there should be one more.
There we go.
There you go.
Did I have to mislabel these, Christian? Yeah. Gosh, Vin. Okay. So, so let's talk about this. So we're talking about a lot of childhood diseases. There's some that we mentioned on there. So
this is
go ahead, and if you want to talk about this.
Yeah, this is the CDC schedule. The furthest to the right is 2015, which was last year. They have actually added 3 doses since then. But one of the questions one of the comments that I often get is, especially from adults, is, "Oh well, I was fully vaccinated and I'm fine." And the answer is, well, yes, but what you were vaccinated with was significantly less than what our children now, if they follow the CDC schedule, are vaccinated with. So if you were born in the 1970s, early 80s, you were probably given about 7 doses, or seven vaccines, 7 shots, and they were your DTaP, which is diphtheria, tetanus, and polio. Pertussis. You would got polio, you would get the MMR vaccine, and those were really the sort of standard ones. Depending on the country you're in, this is the US vaccine schedule. Much of Europe is a lot less than this. Much of the world is a lot less than this. If you're a child that was born last year or this year, by the time you were 18 years old, you would get 72 doses of vaccines. And that is just, that's a huge, huge number and a huge increase. And so, one of the pieces of this is not necessarily the whether vaccines work or don't work. That's definitely a question. But another piece of it is, what are we doing to our children by injecting them with all of these vaccinations? Most of them, so 49 doses, are before the age of 5, and most of them are before the age of 2. And we know that babies, if you read anything else about babies, we know their immune system isn't fully developed. We know that the brain-blood barrier has not been closed. So anything that goes into their bloodstream goes into their brain. And when we come back to the number of, the amount of toxic chemicals that are in vaccines, aluminum, formaldehyde.
Do we have? I think we have maybe a chart of aluminum here.
Yeah.
The first one. It was the first one.
Yeah.
There you go.
That other one. So this is just the ones that were mandated by SB 277 here in California. So basically, this isn't the full CDC schedule, but it's a partial amount of that. But it illustrates it even with just that partial amount of vaccination. This basically shows from birth to 11 years old, the average weight. The second column is the average weight of a child. According to the CDC, that's the average weight of the child in the U.S. The CDC soluble aluminium potentially safe range. So what that means is, in order to ingest it through your mouth, this is the amount of aluminum that is safe. They don't.
Now
have
that's what's above that. So let's be clear. Above. So let's give, for instance, because there are some people who will probably listen to this on a podcast, they can't see anything.
Yes.
So we've got birth, average weight 7 pounds.
Yes.
The potentially safe range that can be ingested through the mouth is 18 micrograms. Is that right? Micrograms?
Correct. Yep. Micrograms.
And
then, so on the first day of birth here in the U.S.,
yes,
the hepatitis B vaccine is given, and that contains 250 micrograms of aluminum.
And that is
that one shot.
1,389% of the safe range. So it's not just toxic by the CDC's own guidelines. It's not just toxic, it's like incredibly toxic.
Well, but there's a little sort of piece that you're missing there, which is that the 18 micrograms, or if you take it in your mouth, the CDC hasn't come out with any recommendations of if it's injected into you.
But it has to be a lot less than that. It has to be less than what you take through your mouth.
But therefore, the 250 micrograms are considered safe for a 7-pound-old child.
Wait.
That's how the vaccine manufacturers get away with putting that into a vaccine.
Wait. No. Wait. Back this up. So, because they have not made an official injection number yet.
Yes.
Because the CDC hasn't said there's a potentially safe range, that means everything is safe? That means any amount is safe?
Any amount is safe. Paul Offit, who is a very pro-vaccine person, has said that you can have... I'm sorry, did I lose
our video?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
Paul Offit has said that, who is a very pro-vaccine, paid by the pharmaceutical companies, works at the University of Philadelphia, I think it is, Children's Hospital, has said that you can get 10,000 vaccines injected into you on one day and you would be fine. And so, yes, the answer is yes. Because they have not come up with any guidelines or any toxicity requirements or information that giving a child on the first day of birth 250 micrograms injected into their bloodstream directly, that's just fine.
But if so, like in his case, but of course, if somebody did inject a child with a whole bunch of poisons and they did have a bad reaction, then they could sue the vaccine company, right? They could just sue the
No.
No, okay, explain this to us.
So, and that's part of the reason why the number of vaccines skyrocketed in the 1980s through to today. So in 1982, there were 4 vaccine manufacturers in the US. They went to Congress and said, we can no longer make vaccines because we're getting sued left, right, and center, and we just don't have the money to make them safe.
Now, what were they getting sued for in these cases?
Reactions.
And the adverse reactions were things like what?
Things like seizures, anaphylactic shock, death. If you read the vaccine package inserts, the actual inserts, all the information is in there, what they could cause. But of course, those aren't given to you.
That's given to every parent, right?
No, it is not. No, we'll get back to that. Let me finish on the 1982. So in 1982, 4 vaccine manufacturers went to Congress and said, we can't do this anymore. Congress said, whoa, wait a minute, we need vaccines. They're saving lives. It would be awful to go back to the caveman era where everybody's dying at the age of 30 because of these vaccine preventable diseases. So in 1986, the Childhood Vaccine Injury Act was passed, and that basically took away all liability from the vaccine manufacturers. It means that you cannot sue a vaccine manufacturer if you have any kind of reaction or any other reason for any vaccine that they have made. Then in 1988, as an outcome of that 1986 Act, the Vaccine Compensation Program was set up. Now, the Vaccine Compensation Program is a no-fault, no-liability court set up by the government you use government attorneys or government-approved attorneys, and the government-approved judge hands you, if you have, and it's only if you have an anaphylactic shock that ends in a permanent disability, or if you die, that you can actually, and it has to be within a certain time range. So it's either 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, that you have to have had the reaction to the vaccine in. And then this judge decides, yes, we'll give you the money, or no, that we won't. Now, the money that goes into that fund that pays and has paid over $3 billion since 1986 to just this select few group of people that have either had a permanent disability, anaphylactic shock with permanent disability, or death, that money comes from our taxes. So we as taxpayers and anyone who gets a vaccine pays money into that fund, and then that fund pays that money out.
So the vaccine companies were able to, unlike most businesses that have some liability for things that they would do. I mean, if I go to McDonald's, which I wouldn't do, but okay. But let's say I go to a restaurant, right? I go to a restaurant, I get poisoned, I get E. coli poisoning or ptomaine poisoning or something like that.
Yes.
From either their negligence or what, even if they're not negligent, even if I just happen to eat there and I could prove that I got E. coli from them just in the course of things,
right.
I can sue the restaurant.
You can, yes.
And the restaurant has to pay me. But
Correct,
if a vaccine that's manufactured by a pharmaceutical company kills a child, that child's parents can't get paid by the vaccine company. They get paid by the government if the government decides that it's legitimate. Is that right? And so it's tax dollars. So the taxpayer is paying for the vaccine manufacturers. It's very. Do I have that right? It seems really off.
It's actually a tax on each vaccine. So when a vaccine is given, there's a 75-cent tax put on each vaccine, and that tax that you're paying goes towards that fund. So basically, you as the customer are paying for if there are any adverse reactions. So it's like you paying an insurance, money for on that vaccine, because they know there are issues, and you know. But the key thing is that when you go to this vaccine court, first of all, it takes years and years and years to go through the vaccine court, and it is very. It's not a court. It's not a jury. It's not a judge that is is open to listening to your case. There's no correlation or there's no causation that the court agrees to. So you can be given money, but the money that you're given is not because the vaccine caused that. There may be a correlation, and there may be your child may have been permanently disabled or died, or the person actually, most of the cases in the past few years have been from the flu vaccine in adults, the cases that have been settled there.
Interesting. Okay, so then let's talk about the potential dangers involved, right? Because it's a cost benefit analysis. I think that we've established that there's definitely some danger with these vaccines. The vaccine companies have admitted it by going and getting this law created. The U.S. government itself admits it by even having this vaccine court and giving out, would you say, $3 billion over the past 30 years or whatever, 35 years. So let's talk about what are these potential costs. The benefits.
Well, and I should also add, in 2011 there was a Supreme Court ruling that basically the Supreme Court stated that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe, which basically means that they are completely unsafe. Like there is just, you can't avoid, but they're unsafe. So
vaccines are unsafe. So even the Supreme Court has said unequivocally that they are. Okay. So let's talk about how they're unsafe and maybe why they're unsafe. So what is it? We talked about the adjuvants. I'm
Yes.
assuming that that's probably where this is at. Let's talk about the mechanism let's talk about the things that are happening, why people are dying, why they're having these, what are the things that are occurring, and then let's talk about why they're occurring. So what are these side effects that are happening?
So, well, I'm going to go back to one of your points
Okay.
that you mentioned before about the vaccine package inserts, and you asked, well, doesn't everybody get them in the doctor's office? So the CDC, as part of that 1986 Act, the CDC agreed to come up with a two-page, one page each side, vaccine information sheet that basically states the disease, what the symptoms are of the disease, how good the vaccine is, not stating any research or anything, but just saying that, basically convincing somebody that the vaccine is good. And then the minor vaccine reactions. So things like swelling at the injection site, maybe some hives, maybe some blisters, depending on what vaccine it was for. But maybe a fever, downplays it very much. Now, if you compare that to the package insert, which is available to everybody, if you Google vaccine package inserts, I think it's immunize.org has a list of all of the package inserts. And that's one of the biggest things. So, we're talking about vaccines and whether they're good or bad. My biggest piece to anybody watching this, anybody listening to it, is do your research before you get vaccinated and make up your own mind. But, my belief is once you go down the rabbit hole, you realize that getting vaccinated is not a good thing. But so anyway, the vaccine package inserts all include the adverse reactions, and listed in every one of them is death. Listed in every one of them is anaphylactic shock. The key piece is, though, if your child or if you have a seizure, for example, after getting vaccinated. So you take your child in, they get a vaccine, they usually get 4 or 5 at the same time, but they have the vaccine and they have a seizure right there in the doctor's office. There's actually nothing that you can do. At that point, you can't see the vaccine manufacturer. It's not a strong enough adverse reaction to go to the vaccine court. So you're left with a child who has seizures, maybe one, maybe multiple, maybe an ongoing lifetime of seizures. But
Wait, so an ongoing seizure disorder is not enough to go and get some money?
It's not, unless it permanently disables your child. So many children who have epilepsy or have seizures constantly, their brain gets damaged and gets inflamed and gets damaged. So in that case, yes, you would be able to. But if you have a child that has a seizure, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 after one round of vaccinations, there's nothing that you can do after that. You don't get any money from that. You don't get anything. The interesting thing too is it's the only drug that I know of that if you had a reaction afterwards, that your doctor would tell you, okay, month's time, okay, these are the next shots you're going to have, roll up your sleeve. Most other drugs, if you were given a pill of any sort, if you were taking a pharmaceutical drug and you took the pill and you had a seizure after taking that pill, your doctor would immediately say, stop, don't take it anymore, you obviously are having an adverse reaction to it. We need to find either another drug or we need to take you off of all of those similar drugs that have similar components in them.
Well, that's the fine. Isn't that the fine print and the little part that the guy always reads on every pharmaceutical television ad that it's like, let your doctor know if you're having any adverse reactions such as blah, 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 blah. And I'm assuming that that's because you don't get to be on the medication anymore if you're having these things.
Yes.
But not so with vaccines.
Not so with the vaccines. And I have to say, I put some of it on the doctors because I don't believe most doctors that are giving vaccinations really know what a vaccine is, what it does, the side effects that they can have. There was a period last year during the whole SB 277 fight that I got really angry with doctors, and I was just like, why are these doctors doing this? They have to know this. But then I did more research and I talked to some doctors who had gone through medical school, and I asked them, what do you learn about vaccines during medical school? And the answer is we have about 2 hours of being taught about it. There are pictures of these children who have each of the diseases. So you have, polio, you have diphtheria, you have smallpox, you have all of these children showing horrific pictures with children with these diseases. So it's scared into them that, oh my God, these are awful. And then you're told vaccines are safe and effective. That's all you need to know. Don't need to know any research on it, and how to inject a vaccine. And so they really only get about 2 hours of of information, and they get a lot of money from giving vaccines. So every child, they're called well child visits. Really, they're not well child visits. They're go to get your vaccine visits is what they really should be called. And in each of those visits, you get money as a doctor because the child is coming in at those regular intervals. If a child wasn't being vaccinated, they wouldn't need to come in at 1 month, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 10 months, 12 months, 18 months. You wouldn't need to do that. You go in to the doctor when your child is sick. You may go in as a baby more often just to make sure you're healthy, but realistically, it's not, you don't need to go in with a baby that often unless you're getting vaccines.
And I mean, what do you have some idea of, like, what is the dollar amount that we could be talking about here? Like, what's potentially, what is it that a doctor's making for one child or whatever?
Well, they get paid for every child, every visit. So
every
they
visit.
get that paid. And then the other piece of this is the insurance companies. And the insurance companies, you have to understand, have financial gains from the farm.
Uh-oh. Did we lose her? Oh, please. Uh-oh. I think we lost you. May have lost you. I hope that is not. I hope that is not an indication that we are about to crash again, because we have had that has seemed to be the indication.
Well, and with me on, I don't give you any guarantees that you won't crash. So,
it is getting wild. But okay, we've got her back. So go because now you're getting. I guess now you're hitting the sweet spot.
Now
where
I'm hitting
it's like,
yeah, exactly.
Shut
Now I've spoken for too long. It's like enough.
So the insurance companies, you were saying, have a vested interest.
Yeah, the insurance companies have a vested interest because they get kickbacks from the pharmaceutical companies for selling vaccines. And so the insurance companies have gone to doctors now, and we have proof of this, but they've gone to doctors now and said, okay, if your practice is not your pediatrician specifically, if your practice is not up to date on all their vaccinations, if 95% of your practice is not up to date on all vaccinations by the age of 2, then we will pull your coverage. So, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Anthem, Cigna, all of those. So they're no longer in their network.
Wow.
The other piece of it is, on the flip side of it, we also have those same insurance companies, not necessarily all of them that we've seen, but we know of some at least, are giving kickbacks to doctors for having their 2-year-old children up to date on vaccinations. And it's not the doctor, so there's a loophole in the law that a doctor is not allowed to get those kickbacks, but the practice is allowed to get the kickbacks. So those doctors are getting around $400 per child in their practice that is 2 years old that is up to date on their vaccinations.
Wow, so that's basically so I guess you could kind of say at every year, every 2-year-old that they have in their practice that they've got up to date, they're getting $400. I mean, in a big practice, in a big like metropolitan area, that could be thousands of dollars.
Oh yeah.
I mean, for sure, that could be tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Additional to the practice.
Yeah. And the other piece of it is that if you are a doctor who even questions vaccines, gives vaccines in your practice, but you may not give them on the same schedule, or you may not give them, you may look at each child individually and really assess, what autoimmune disorders are in this child's history, what other reactions has the family had to vaccines or to other drugs, and look at the child as a sort of do the risk to benefit ratio of what's the likelihood of them getting the disease and then an adverse reaction to the disease versus what's the likelihood of them getting the vaccine, which would be 100% once you've stuck the needle in, and the adverse reaction from the vaccines, and kind of doing that risk benefit analysis. And that piece of it, even those doctors who do that, they may vaccinate in their practice. There's a witch hunt out for them, and they're being called out by the pharmaceutical, basically by not the pharmaceutical companies, but the people that work or paid for by the pharmaceutical companies. So people like Paul Offit, people like Senator Pan, who's our senator here that put through the SB 277. They at every moment are willing to call out doctors who are not fully on board with the vaccination schedule. I mean, to me, it's truly a religion. The whole vaccine issue is a religion, and they have bought in 100% to this vaccine belief and this vaccine religion.
So okay, so now some people may have their, now that they understand, they may have some idea of, okay, there are some questions at hand. So, but let's, I mean, I do want to get back to what these adverse reactions are. So we said
Yes.
seizures. Seizures
So,
is something. What else? I mean, are there, what are the other, what's the range?
so it depends on, yeah, it depends on the vaccine. There are different reactions for different vaccines because obviously the virus causes different reactions in the immune system. But ones that are listed in the vaccine package, and actually anybody who wants to see a full list of possible adverse reactions, if you go to a website called vaccineinjuryisreal.com, there's a list of all of them on there. But other ones include brain inflammation, encephalopathy, encephalitis, meningitis. There's nerve damage, there's coma, seizures, stroke, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is basically paralysis. That's very common. Or not, it's not very common, but it's one of the most common side effects from the flu vaccine. Inflammation of the pancreas. Arthritis is an interesting one. The measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, when it's given to post-pubescent women, so adult women, has a 25% of you getting chronic arthritis after it. So you have to question, when you get, there are childcare workers, there are healthcare workers that are being, and university students now too, that are being told you need to get the MMR vaccine. Well, 25% of those women as adults who get the MMR vaccine get arthritis. There's allergies, there's eczema, lupus, diabetes, as I said, anaphylactic shock, cardiomyopathy. There's a huge list. There's a lot of research coming out of Israel and other countries, not the US, that's showing that there's a link between autoimmune disorders and any autoimmune disorder and vaccine adjuvants. And so basically what's happening, and those are things that don't come up a week or 2 weeks or 5 weeks or 10 weeks after you get the vaccine. Those come up years later. And basically the research coming out of Israel is showing that when that adjuvant that we talked about at the beginning, when your body gets that immune stimulation and basically your immune system goes into overdrive, what happens is the genes that are associated with autoimmune disorders, so there are genes associated with arthritis, with cancer, with MS, with all of those things, those genes get triggered to being into the on position through the vaccine stimulation of your immune system. So the easiest one that I explain to people when they look at me like, oh my God, what are you talking about, is the breast cancer gene. So we all know that there's a breast cancer gene.
Yes.
If you have the breast cancer gene, doesn't mean to say you'll get breast cancer in your lifetime, but there's a higher likelihood of you getting breast cancer.
Yes.
And different things will trigger that breast cancer gene. Now, what you do, as a reaction to knowing that you have the breast cancer gene is your choice. But
Angelina Jolie cut her breasts off, right? That's what we're talking about, the thing with Angelina Jolie, right?
So, but it doesn't mean to say that she would have gotten breast cancer in her lifetime. She just would have been more likely to.
Right,
so similarly, when you have the gene for arthritis, for example, or MS, doesn't mean to say you'll get arthritis in your lifetime. But at some point, that gene may be triggered to the on position, and you'll develop it. Well, the vaccine adjuvants are more likely to make that happen. And it may not happen with the first vaccine. It may not happen with the second vaccine. It may happen with the 10th vaccine. And that's the thing. There's no research that's been done to show what the reactions are to these vaccines. You're basically playing a game of Russian roulette with yourself, with your child. And people say, well, I'm fine. Yeah, you're fine this time. Are you going to be fine next time?
Right.
I don't know.
And would you have still been fine had you gotten the full regimen that's being recommended at this point?
Yeah.
And I also feel like when I got my vaccinations, I feel like I was coherent. Like, I feel like I remember, and I feel like I could talk at that time. So are they starting to give them younger as well?
Yeah, much younger. Much younger. I mean, the U.S. has the hepatitis B in the first 12 hours of after birth. That is, there are very few other countries that do that. The other
hold on. Okay, so hepatitis B, first 12 hours of birth.
Sexually transmitted disease,
right?
Or
As I understand it,
needles.
hepatitis B is either if you're a hypodermic needle user, like a junkie basically, or you are having sex with someone who Oh, we lost her again.
Yeah, I know. It's my phone. I'm sorry. So yes, the other place is if the mother has hepatitis B, then it may be passed to the child. So those are the 3 times. Well, instead of just looking at those 3 times and looking at that, they decided, you know what, it's just easier to give blanket hepatitis B vaccine to everyone, i.e., let's make some money. The hepatitis B vaccine used to be given in teenage years. And when it started being given on a regular basis, it was recommended at teenage years because that's when you become sexually active.
Right.
Well, teenagers weren't coming into the doctor's office on a regular basis, and so they decided it was just easier to bring it forward to the first day of birth. But as I said, most vaccines now are given between the age of 0 and 2 years old. And, at the 4-month vaccines, you're given between 4 and 5 shots, so individual vaccines, so 1 in each arm, 1 in each leg, and then maybe 1 duplicated somewhere else, duplicated in one of those places. And that's for 9 different diseases. That's the other thing to think about. 9 different diseases are being given on one day. When in your lifetime would you ever be exposed and get 9 different diseases?
Right.
Never.
So
Never.
it's playing a game with the immune system that the immune system has not evolved to play.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's even if you get measles, if on one day you're exposed to measles, you get the measles. If on another day, while you have the measles or after you've been exposed to the measles, if you're exposed to the mumps,
I mean, what are the chances of that? What are the chances of that? I mean, who does that happen to? You're in bed. You're in bed if you've got measles. Yeah.
Exactly. But if that happened to happen to you, it's been shown that the immune system would not take on the mumps. Like it doesn't take on everything. Like it's fighting the measles, so it's got the immune system revved up it's revved up enough that it's not going to take on any other diseases unless you're really, really sick. Like if you're very immunocompromised and you're sick, and I'll say this, over and over again, if you're immunocompromised and you're sick and you're prone to getting sick, you shouldn't be in school. You shouldn't be out in public. You shouldn't be in the movie theaters. Like you should be at home getting yourself well, or in a hospital where you're in a more sterile environment. But you shouldn't, if you're that immune compromised, you're going to get sick from the common cold. You're going to get, you're going to have an a much worse reaction to things that are not vaccine preventable, that occur in our world every day.
So let's move. I would like to talk about. I mean, you've briefly touched on the particular bill in California, SB 277. That's been a sort of a touch point for this whole thing because a lot of people view it as the beginning of kind of a new regime. Can you talk to us about what's in this bill, and then can you talk to us about what the move is, or sort of where the momentum is in bills like this moving forward in the U.S.?
Sure. So SB 277 basically, as I said, took away the personal belief exemption. Every state in the U.S. other than West Virginia, Mississippi, and now California allow for either a personal belief and or a religious exemption to vaccines as you go into school. So every state has a list of vaccines when you go into school that you're supposed to have. But in all but those 3 states, you can sign a letter of varying, different letters in different states. They have different requirements. But you basically sign a letter that says, I don't believe in vaccines, or my religion goes against vaccines, and my child isn't fully vaccinated. And that's all you need to do, and your child can go through school. So California last year passed SB 277, which took away that personal belief exemption and the religious exemption. We didn't actually have a religious exemption. It was under the personal belief exemption, and allowed now only medical exemptions. So the only way you can get into school without being fully vaccinated is by having a medical exemption. And that medical exemption can include family history. So if you have a family history of autoimmune disorders, then there are doctors, there are not many in California because not many of them are not under the whole insurance piece that I talked about, that will give medical exemptions based on the individual child, and they look at, as I said before, they weigh those risks and benefits of getting the disease, having an adverse reaction, versus getting the vaccine and having an adverse reaction. For anyone in California that would like a medical exemption, you can contact me at avoiceforchoice.org, and we'll give you a doctor who will give you a second opinion on that, because most people have gone to their doctors already, and the doctor has said, oh no, I can't give you a medical exemption because you have to have had an anaphylactic shock or some extreme reaction. So that's basically what SB 277 did. There was last year a wave of those bills throughout the U.S. There were 131 bills in, I think it was 36 states, and each of them tried to do similar things. Every other state defeated them. California did not, and it wasn't for lack of trying. It was the pharmaceutical companies and the California Medical Association had a lot of money in it. And there was a lot of horse trading that went on in our legislature, and so it was passed, and we now have that law. The rest of the country, and I say this hopeful because Trump is in office and not Hillary Clinton. If we had Clinton in office or coming into office, we would have vaccine mandates across the board, no doubt about it. Trump hopefully will not push that because he's more about bodily autonomy and parental rights, and also understands the vaccine issue more and the adverse reactions to vaccines more. But we do have a bill right now, today, tomorrow, Wednesday, being pushed through the Senate. It got through the Congress last week. It was a bill that was gutted and replaced by what used to be H.R. 6, which is the 21st Century Cures Act, and it's now H.R. 34. And basically, it is a fast-track pharmaceutical bill. When you look at it on the surface, it looks like it's a wonderful bill that will fast-track medical devices, medical drugs for those people really in need of them, and that it's basically a fast-track process. It takes out, waiting from clinical trials to the drug coming onto the market. It takes that time and cuts it down, and means that many people are going to be cured by this act. Well, if you actually read the 1,000 pages of it, it's a scary, scary act. There were 1,400 lobbyists, more than 1,400 lobbyists involved in the writing of the act, and it's basically a pharmaceutical drug act that rushes vaccines and all other drugs through the process so much faster, and doesn't take into consideration informed choice, informed consent, doesn't take into consideration the fact that you have to do proper clinical trials on drugs, and basically it's a horrible act that hopefully we can stop in the Senate this week, but it went through the Congress unanimously pretty much. So. There are bill, and it's being rushed through in the lame duck session because they know that next year it wouldn't be able to be pushed through. So, there are various bills that, and this year coming in, we're going to have to look out for more bills throughout the U.S. on an individual state level. There definitely, I think it's in. I don't remember which state it is, but I think it's Texas already has 2 or 3 bills brought forward that again reduce the personal belief exemption or make it much harder to get a personal belief exemption.
Wow, it's potentially pretty scary. If people want to find out about what's going on in their state, or they want more information on what they could do to fight, or even if they're how they can get a medical exemption, what should they do? How should they go about doing that?
So they can we have 2 sites because we have 2 organizations. They can go to avoiceforchoice.org, all spelt out, or we have a Voice for Choice advocacy, which is more of our advocacy lobbying site, and that has all the information about the bills. We're nationally, we look at federal bills. We also look at California state. If you're not in California state, NVIC, which is the National Vaccine Information Center, their NVICadvocacy.org site is a great place and has every single state, every single bill that has to do with vaccines specifically.
Awesome. Wow. Well, great stuff. I'm sure that we'll have to have you back on again as these bills move through. I thank you for coming on, Christina Hildebrand.
Thank you for having us.
A Voice for Choice. Some very, very interesting information. I know that there's a lot more that we could get into, but we'll definitely have you back on again because this is an issue that means a lot to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. All right. Christian. Where are you, sir?
There we go. Wow. I just I just got on the activist post feed and I said, everyone should listen to this vaccine section. It is extremely important.
It's really, what, are you hearing a little voice in the background, dude? What is that? Is that your phone?
I had to check this out.
I was listening, I was like, Christian? No, did you know that much information?
No, I had no idea. And it's, oh man, it's extremely important.
The thing that's the most interesting to me is, and the scariest part to me, is the fact that the vaccine companies are not liable. There's something natural. It's the same issue that I think most people have with the idea of corporations, which I think drives back into a lot, when people are talking about, when I advocate a stateless society and I say, there's a lot of problems with the state, there's a lot of problems with the government, and we'd be better with a stateless society. One of the things that they constantly come back with is they're like, well, then the corporations would be in control. And I think that one thing that a lot of people don't understand when it comes to the concept of the corporation is that a corporation is a government program.
Yeah.
Without government, there is no corporation. The idea of a corporation is it's a fictitious person. That's the corpus body. Mm-hmm. That's the corporation. That it's the creation of a fictitious person recognized by the government. And the reason for that fictitious person is to take liability away from the people who are running that corporation, to take financial liability, to take legal liability away from them. That the corporation takes on the liability. Well, when the corporation is even now able to not be liable anymore. That's where protections lie. That's where all of the biggest protection, honestly, it's not regulations, it's not laws, it's not things like that, it's lawsuits. Mm-hmm. It's lawsuits. Mm-hmm. Most businesses, and I mean, I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, I'm more afraid of a lawsuit than I am a visit from some government agency regulating whatever it is that I'm doing. Because at the most, a government agency could fine me or whatever. A lawsuit, if something has gone wrong, especially if it's something like somebody gets injured or something like that, a lawsuit can basically see them taking my entire business. Mm-hmm. Right? You saw it recently with Gawker. Mm-hmm. Right? Gawker almost lost the entire company because of Hulk Hogan sued him. It took $150 million, and they were like, "This is basically going to sink the company." Lawsuits, the ability to, while it is a government thing, but that doesn't mean that arbitration has to happen at a government level. But the idea that someone can seek compensation, some recompense for injuries that are done by another person is very important. It's a very important aspect of keeping a culture going. I mean, we've got laws about this stretching back, this sort of arbitration and dispute resolution, stretching back to the beginning of civilization. This was one of the main things that kings would do. Two people would come in. You've got stories of it in the Bible.
Yep.
And a good king was seen as someone who could, resolve a dispute. But the same with chiefs. There's a whole system in Arabia. But when you get outside of that, and the liability's gone, for me, that's a huge one.
Nothing's real at that point. You can get away with whatever you want.
And the amount of money also involved. You've got to, when we're talking about it, it's was it hepatitis B or C? So they give that at birth. They recommend and they give it within the first 12 hours. You got to multiply the cost of that vaccine over every single child born in the U.S. Whoever's making that vaccine is killing the game. And it's obvious, you could see it's not necessarily needed. If the mother doesn't have the disease, they're not going to be doing intravenous drugs, and they're not going to be having sex. Mm-hmm. They're a baby.
Yep.
If the mother doesn't have it, they have no chance of getting this, and yet you're giving them the vaccine. So for me, I'm like, that just says that it's all about money. If that one's about money, I've got to assume the rest of them are all about money.
Yep. And control.
And control.
Because what the repercussions of the vaccine, there's a lot of different factors there.
Well, and you also have, and perhaps we can end it on this, but it's the lack of information that people are given,
Kept in the dark.
And the idea that the government can mandate that you get something put into you, some drug, some chemical. First it's vaccines, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. It never stops at vaccines. Because you saw it was this amount of vaccines, then it went to this, then it went to this, and now what? We're going to have nano vaccines. They're going to be shooting chips.
Yeah. It's
and
already.
If the government can say that we can do this because it's for the greater good, then they can, and it's all about who determines what the greater good is. And maybe that's how I'll end this out. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Vin,
for today. An interesting show, and a lot of it is about the greater good, right? If we go to the Dakota Access Pipeline, you've got two sides, don't you? You've got one side that would argue that the greatest good is to protect the earth and to protect the native peoples and their spirituality and their cultural heritage at all costs. You have another side that says, well, no, we need to have energy independence, and we need to protect the energy independence of the United States of America for a lot of different reasons that also have to do with peace and that also have to do with the greater good. You have the Russian propaganda and fake news and the idea that certain information needs to be snuffed out for the greater good. You have this Coinbase story and the US government saying that for the greater good, they're actually going to go against the Fourth Amendment. And then in the case of vaccines, the idea that we would like the government to mandate that children have these poisons, which even the manufacturers admit that they are toxic and poisonous. Even the Supreme Court admits that they are toxic and poisonous. But we are going to allow the government to mandate that these poisons are put into children. And the idea is for the greater good. And this is a dangerous concept. And I'm going to talk about it and continue to talk about it, because when you move in the direction of the greater good, when you ask the state, when you ask those who have the power of violent coercive force to use that violent coercive force to enforce the greater good, you do it to the disadvantage of the lesser good. And you see, freedom, liberty, that Bill of Rights, the idea of human rights, they are not there to protect the greater good. They are there to protect the lesser good. You see, they're not there to protect the majority. The majority doesn't need protection. The minority needs protection. And I do find it interesting that the people who are most often saying that they are working for the greater good, be it social justice, environmental justice, are the same people who at the same time say that minorities need to be protected. You can't have it both ways. The only ethical and moral movement that you can take in assessing what actions need to be taken is not based on the greater good. It's based on the least of the lesser good, and that is the good of the individual. Because each one of us is a part of that minority, the minority of one. Doesn't matter if you're part of a racial minority, an ethnic minority, a language minority. That's not the important minority. The important minority is the one that you're always a part of. And that's the individual. And if you're going to respect minorities truly, if you're going to look out for the rights of the minority truly, then you have to look out for the rights of the individual. And that's the person looking you in the eye and asking you not to vote in something that takes away their right to privacy or their bodily autonomy. We can make these sorts of decisions. We can move forward. But it's got to be with that consideration of not the greater good, but the least good. Because that's you and that's me. So thank you very much for tuning in. We will see you again next week at 10 a.m. next Monday. In the meantime, you can, of course, view our archives at youtube.com/Vin Armani, facebook.com/activistpost, and I encourage you to follow them and share on Facebook as we're getting throttled by them. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at Vin Armani. You can follow Christian at Christian_Rays. And you can get the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. You can go to vinarmani.com/iTunes or vinarmani.com/Stitcher. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again next week.